Hello. There it is. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see such a great turnout for this, I think, very important talk today by Dr. Donya Ahmadi on the protests that have been taking place in Iran for the past weeks, anyway, in terms of protests caused by the death of Mahsa Amini, a young woman in Iran, Kurdish Iranian woman, who was unfortunately beaten to death by the morality police in Iran, sparking this wave of protests that's been going on today. Dr. Ahmadi will contextualize this for everybody and definitely show us that this is not an isolated incident, that there's a lot of history in terms of protest movements in Iran. So I'm looking very much forward to this. I am Hisham Hamad. I am a lecturer at Middle Eastern Studies in the University of Groningen, and I'm very happy to have been invited to moderate this event. I don't do any research into Iran. My own topic of interest is literature and cultural history in Egypt. But from a personal experience and also a personal interest, I've been following the protest movements in the Middle East for the past 10 years anyway. I was actually on the Tahrir Square in Egypt in 2011, and I've seen so many protests happen, both within the Arab world, which is my domain of study, but also in Iran, actually continuously, basically since 2011. So yes, this is again an event that is very moving to me personally as well, but causes a lot of mixed feelings, probably amongst some of you as well, in terms of, you know, admiring the bravery, but not having a lot of cause for optimism based on the very recent history anyway. So I'm very curious as to what we can learn today, and and I'm actually hopeful as well that there might be a cause for optimism this time. I would like to give the floor to Dr. Donya Ahmadi. Thank you very much for coming. The agenda, really quickly, is that we will be listening to Donya for about 30 minutes, and then we will open up the floor for questions for another 20 to 30 minutes, and afterwards you would like to invite someone to come up to the front and present their case. Is that the way to state it? All right. You're welcome to start.
Thank you so much. Let's see, my microphone is working. Oh my God, thank you so much for coming. It's really, it's so touching every time to see a turnout for us. We've entered over 2 months since the protests have started in Iran, and we've continuously gotten this feeling that our protest, rather revolution, which is why Masoud is here today to collect petitions at the end, that this is a revolution and we want the world to know it as such. But it is, the general feeling is that the world is not paying attention. And we are unfortunately so used to seeing violence in the Middle East, death in the Middle East normalized as an everyday business, that I think these events, our life stories, our histories of struggle, garner a little bit of attention, episodes of attention, and then we move on. So this is a contrary to that disappointing tendency sometimes that we have, and I'm very happy to be part of this event. I'm very grateful to Stadium Generale, to dear Annelies who reached out, who facilitated this, and Karen and Hisham, of course. It's very great that you say that you were at Tahrir Square, because we need to ask you for some advice and to strategize with you, really. We're at a point in this revolution that we need to look for more creative ways forward, so as to counter a sense of isolation and a sense of being stuck, a sense of paralysis, if you may. So we'll come back to you about that. My name is Donya Ahmadi, as Hisham kindly introduced. I'm an assistant professor of international relations here at the Department of International Relations and International Organization and the Faculty of Arts, the Harmony Building. I see some of our students here tonight, some of our lovely colleagues. It's very nice to have you. And I must say, my feminist sisters from the Iranian community who are my heart, who have organized, who have collectively done so much. And I tend to take the spotlight a lot, so they have facilitated. It's their labor that allows for our collective resistance to happen, at least in the context of Groningen. I'm going to talk a little bit. My field, my specialty is gender studies and sociology, gendered sociology. And my research is on the history and the contemporary manifestations of gendered and feminist resistance in Iran. So this is where my heart lies and where my academic specialty also lies. I'm a migrant myself. I moved to the Netherlands about 12 years ago. I came to study, and then I stayed, and I got married to my wonderful husband, who's very shy. I don't want to put him on the spotlight. I'm going to today talk to you about what is driving the feminist revolution in Iran, what is behind the feminist revolution in Iran. This is a very recent photo of one of our friends in London who's holding this beautiful sign that is full of relevance and hope. So a quick outline of today's presentation. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on now. So how this revolution came about, what is going. I think that's probably one of the most interesting things for everyone in this crowd, if I may guess. I want to talk a little bit about patterns of gendered oppression, about experience of gendered oppression under the Islamic Republic of Iran, and also talk a little bit in return about feminist defiance and gendered resistance under the Islamic Republic of Iran as well. And then, if time allows, then I will also go a little bit into the 20th century to establish a historical pattern and continuum, to argue that today's revolution is not, as Hisham puts it, an isolated event. It has a history of over 100 years of feminist and liberation struggles behind it. I'm just going to talk about the images as well because I think they're important. This is from the first International Day of Working Women after the 1979 revolution, 8th of March, 1979. I'm going to talk a little bit about this particular incident as well. What's happening in Iran right now, Hisham already pointed out to this about a little bit over 2 months ago. And there's something in the text that I have to apologize about. This was my responsibility. That the text says the death of Jina Mahsa Amini. This was by no means a death. It was a political murder. And that was an error that existed in the text. I hope it didn't isolate some of the audience who otherwise would have come to the event. Because the framing of this action, this heinous action matters. There is a graffiti from Tehran, I believe, with Mahsa's image, and it says, Mahsa Jan, your name became the code, the secret code for the overthrow of the Islamic regime in Iran. And the image of the left is an artwork from an anonymous Iranian artist, and it's the portrait of Jina. Jina became the first sort of, the symbol of this round of political uprising. She was traveling from the Kurdish city of Saqqez to Tehran with her brother when she was picked up by the vigilantes that ironically and perhaps aptly call themselves the morality police because she was deemed immoral. What happens is that what we think happened, and there are some witness accounts and some medical evidence that she suffered a blow to the head before she got in the car, already in the encounter that she had with the so-called morality police. She got taken to a building, Wozara, is Iranian women among us, most of us have been there if you've lived in Iran, unfortunately, is the infamous holding spot where women are taken to in Tehran when they're picked up. And then they're detained there and many things happened, including physical violence, sexual violence. Jina was taken, detained in that space, and then after a few hours, she lost consciousness. There's footage of this. She was taken to a hospital, and she later died in the hospital. And this sparked mass protest in Iran, as I'm sure all of you know by now. And as part of this protest, the retaliation of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the regime in Iran, started. A day later, a Kurdish woman called Minu Majidi, who was a family friend, was shot on the streets in Kermanshah, in the Kurdish city of Kermanshah, and died on the spot. And this has continued. And after 2 months, we have entered a chapter where we are witnessing mass executions commencing. And something that I want to say to this crowd, especially to my Iranian siblings in the crowd, is that this is the technique, this is the tactic, this is engineered methods of the Islamic Republic of Iran to paralyze us, to render us powerless. Because there is an exasperation that we feel at this point that nothing we've done matters. These heinous acts are going to continue. Every day that we wake up, someone is going to have been executed. Some of these executions are taking place publicly. The first 3 executions, political executions, happened in Baluchistan, where Masoud is from, who I'm going to invite at the end to speak to us a little bit. We do not even know the name of these people. Many of the people who've been victimized in Baluchistan don't have birth certificates. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I apologize. So this feeling of exasperation, of feeling powerless, this is, it's not a coincidence, it's not reality. I'm sorry, I didn't expect this, I'm really sorry. It's an emotional whirlpool. But what I want to say, and I shouldn't cry when I say this, is that this is precisely the moment that we shouldn't give up, that we should continue our resistance. Because the Islamic Republic of Iran has done this before. And this has caused this, has pushed us into paralysis before. I'm so sorry. I don't know, I wasn't processing this for weeks. And then I'm giving a talk at the university, and this happens. I hope you bear with me. It's a bit of a...
I'm proud of her. I say in Farsi it's very painful to see, to be the witness of such a crime and could do nothing. This, I said to her, please don't apologize. Yep. It's our daily life, the daily life of 80 million of Iranian people, and also 10% of them in abroad. I'm very thankful for that. We all believe.
Thank you. Merci, Azza. No. Thank you so much. All right, let me gather myself back up, because you didn't come here to see me cry, of course. I'm not going to apologize for it. It's just difficult. I did not anticipate this in any way, shape, or form, but it gets you in the least unexpected. What I wanted to say, and I hope I didn't fail in saying this, that when we realize that this is an engineered tactic, we can fight it. We can be like, this was done to make us feel paralyzed, and I know so many of us felt that way. But what I want to say is that we want to enter a new, we now in the diaspora feel like our organization tactics haven't gotten us where we wanted to be. In a sense that it hasn't garnered the amount of attention, the amount of solidarity that we wanted to get. I want to say this in, I don't know if this is the right platform for it, but we are speaking now to the left in the Netherlands. We're not speaking just to the Iranian community. We're speaking to progressive political parties like Bay'in. We're speaking to intersectional feminists. We're speaking to anybody who has a concern for human rights. This is not a domestic issue. This is an attack on human rights. So when we organize, we need people who embody privilege to come forward so that our issues are not domesticized, that they're not reduced to local issues of another day in the Middle East. Masoud is here to especially tell us what his plans are. We may be organizing a European, a transnational action of sit-ins in front of key governmental buildings like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. And we will sit there, we will do this collectively until diplomats or Iranian regime's diplomats are expelled. Because the continuation of diplomatic relations while in Iran, a revolution is taking place to us is unacceptable. And I think this is a concern for anybody who fancies themselves a political person. And there's also one thing that I think the lobby of the Islamic Republic of Iran has been so successful, unfortunately. I'm talking about particularly the National Iranian American Council, NIAC, that has tirelessly lobbied with millions of euros of funding to establish this revolution as an Islamophobic revolution. Our main allies are Muslim sisters. We are not in opposition to our Muslim sisters. We're in tandem, we're in solidarity with them, because our Muslim sisters know better than anybody the nature of the violence that we're facing with this fundamentalism. Our Afghan sisters, our Iraqi sisters, our Kurdish sisters, our Egyptian sisters. And what I want to say about the executions is that the political executions in Iran are a gendered tool. They have a gendered history. What we're seeing, this is about the first political executions, some of the first political executions that took place in Iran only a year after the Revolutionary Council, under the leadership of Ayatollah Khomeini himself, formed. There was a colony of sex workers in Tehran. This was a legalized colony of sex workers called Shahr-e-Nau, which means a new city. And about 2 weeks before the 1979 revolution, it was set on fire. So a group of vigilantes who call themselves revolutionaries, zealots, Hezbollahis, what have you call them, they sort of rushed this area, they set it on fire. The witness accounts say that many of the sex workers died, a lot of whom were from disenfranchised working class families, a lot of whom were sold into prostitution, a lot of whom were from ethnic nations of Iran, a lot of whom were from rural cities of Iran. So the first women under the Islamic Republic of Iran who were executed were 3 sex workers. I want to say that to say on the bodies of whom the discourse and the practice of political executions has been normalized. The most disenfranchised and marginalized women in the country. There were 3 women, so this is a headline from, I don't know if you can read it, the Farsi readers, Tir of 1358, that's the summer of 1980. So 3 women sex workers were executed. I have written their names. The first one is Sakine Qasemi, by the name of Pari, who's the woman on the left. The second one was Soraya Sahib Ikhtiyari, and the third one was Zahra Mafiha, who went by the name Ashraf. Of the 2 other, I could not find confirmed photographs. And this photo is taken by Kaveh Gulistan, for those of you who know him. So is the gendered history of political violence in our country. And of course, with gendered, we're also talking about sexual history of the repression of sexual minorities, of ethnic nations, of religious minorities, and so on and so forth. So I think now that we're focusing on the normalization of the political execution discourse in Iran, it's important to remember, where it started. How am I doing with? I'm doing very poorly with time, aren't I?
It's okay. At least 15 minutes left.
Okay, I cried for 5 minutes, so now I have to. Yes, this is an image. So let's take it back to the beginning of the 1979 revolution. This is an image right before the revolution. The reason I've chosen it is because it shows the diversity of women's organization before the revolution. Iranian women organized in masses before the 1979 revolution. There's a lot of literature that says Iranian women were enchanted by the charismatic persona of Ayatollah Khomeini and what have you. This is all bullshit, if I may. Iranian women had decades of political organization, which I hope that I get to talk about today. And this was an example of secular women, leftist women, and Muslim women wearing the hijab walking together for what they thought was a people's revolution that was going to bring equality and justice for everyone. So I usually give this historical background into what the Islamic Republic of Iran did immediately after it commenced. So February 1979, the revolution won. The Revolutionary Council took shape, again, under the leadership of Ayatollah Khomeini. Sorry. Here is what this regime did to women. 3 days, think about it, 3 days after the success of the revolution, women were barred from being judges, and those women judges who were in practice were either demoted to secretarial positions or were fired. I think there's a lot of symbolism there as well, putting judges to a secretarial support position. About 2 weeks later, the first and only piece of legislation in the beginning, in the first 8 months, let's say, of this new revolutionary government that was torn apart and done away with completely was a law called the Family Protection Act, which was ratified in the mid-1970s. It was the most progressive piece of legislation from a gendered front that legalized abortion. We're talking about 1970s Iran. That raised the age of marriage to 18 for girls, the highest age of marriage for girls under any law in Iran. It granted women custody rights that were unprecedented. It limited male polygamy, or what we call polygyny. And this was one of the biggest accomplishments, not of the Pahlavi regime, like they wanted to promote it as such, of the women's movement, of decades of political organization. The last sort of, how do you say, I want to say the cherry on top of the cupcake, but it feels a very inappropriate analogy. The last sort of, what do you say this? What is this expression I'm looking for? The last straw, let's say, was somehow Ayatollah Khomeini chose a day before the International Day of Working Women, 8th of March, to say in an announcement that women members of office, so women members of political state organizations, were to abide by Islamic dress code. So they had to wear the hijab. And this infuriated women who already sensed, there was already a sense of distrust between the women and the Ayatollahs from decades of resistance from them for the gender emancipation of women. And I must say that leftist women already had organized a sort of rally for the first International Day of Working Women after the success of the People's Revolution. So there was an action, but this was supposed to be a celebration, a revolutionary celebration, but it became the biggest the first big protest, mass demonstration after the commencement of the revolutionary regime. Women took to the street in thousands. They were beaten. Some of them were stabbed. They were sexually harassed. And these demonstrations went on for a few days. What I would like to say here is that the men, the progressive men, so the secular nationalists, the Iranian Marxists, the guerrilla activists, they failed to support these women and walk beside them. Time and time again, I have personally made this argument in my own work, that had Iranian political dissident men been sensitized to the issue of gender inequality as a political issue that is at the core of democracy, that is at the core of an equal and just political system, they would not have borne the prices and the rather hefty punishment that this government subjected them to for the course of the 10 years that were to come. So we're talking about thousands of people who were executed, hundreds of them executed about 8 years after the revolution. In the course of 48 hours, without trial, their bodies dumped in mass grave. Some of those generations are sitting in this room today who lost their loved ones. And that's when I talk about a pattern of suppression, a pattern of violence, and the paralysis that it has pushed us into, I'm talking about us reliving our trauma decade and decade again. So how are we doing with time, Hisham? Can I go forward? Okay, I like how you keep extending the, great. So I want to now take a step back, so go about a century back to the beginning of the 19th century to the constitutional period. This is where it gets a little bit more light, I hope. Oh, the Farsi went kaput. It's okay. This is an image of a women's partisan. The woman in the white garment, in the white scarf, is called Zainab Pasha. She was a revolutionary from the region of Azerbaijan who led 7 groups of armed women partisans, 7 groups, not 7 members, to organize for the constitutional cause. This is the early 1900s. This is the first ever women's organization in Iran that was established in 1906. And this is something that I always tell, and also in Azerbaijan of Iran, in northwest Iran, I always tell my students to look at this image because it's so radically different than the aesthetics that we associate early 20th century, Middle Eastern or Muslim women with, which you can see they're wearing their sort of fashioning bullets. This is a more apt example of the women's organization's composition in urban areas. So this is the first time that we witnessed the sort of formation of what at the time were called secret women's councils. So groups of women who met in secrecy to talk about gendered and political issues. And here I have some notes about it. I have argued myself that this was perhaps the most radical women's movement that Iran has seen, at least in the 20th century, and perhaps even up to today, in that it was independent and it was autonomous. It was independent from masculinist politics. It organized both around gendered demands, but also around nationalist demands. So the gendered demands at the time were mostly women's education and women's health. But they also lobbied for members of parliament to speak on their behalf. Of course, women weren't members of parliament in our first parliament, for the issue of the vote, the female vote, early 1900s. It, of course, received stark opposition from the religious authorities. A nominal example is the fatwa by Sheikh Fazlullah Nouri, who was a staunch opposer of the constitutional cause. And this fatwa is a religious call to action. And it sort of unleashed a series of fundamentalist fans and followers who then attacked these girls and their teachers on the way to school and back, who subjected them to sexual assault, physical assault, and what have you. But I must say that next to the religious authority, also the sort of progressive constitutionalist activists and members of parliament also did not support female cause. So it wasn't just the religious, this was something that was shared across the board by men in politics. Then if we go quickly to the Pahlavi 1 and 2 periods, for the sake of time, I'm going to try to make this rather short, but I think it's quite important history to talk about, to establish context. So Reza Shah was the first Pahlavi Shah. He was a military man from the region of Mazandaran in the north of Iran. He was a trained Kazakh military man. He came to power through a coup d'etat, first as the Minister of War, then as the Prime Minister, and then he was appointed as Shah of Iran. He was a military man, and he ruled the country like a military man with an iron fist, in a sense that he heavily crushed his dissidents. Of course, women's rights activists and the feminist movement were at the forefront of those groups. However, he had a rather top-down modernization plan for Iran. The introduction of European bureaucracy was the main component of this. So presenting a sort of evolving or modernizing image of the nation was important to his modernization project. Hence, he could not completely forego the female cause. And in so doing, he created the first centralized government-run women's organization through which he depoliticized the Iranian women's movement. So those Iranian women's activists whose cause was too political were heavily repressed by Reza Shah, and those who could be sort of coerced into joining the Kanun Banavan, the sort of central channel for women's activism, survived. So this was a coercion period of the Iranian women's movement's history, I've argued. And what's interesting about this period is that for the first time, charity became a domain of women's activism. This didn't exist before Reza Shah. And what this did to the movement further was that charity meant that urban middle-class Iranian women who had political intentions and who had energy, mobilizational energy, they get sort of appointed to go to rural areas and teach women how to sew, or teach women how to cook, or to homemake. So quite patriarchal activities. And so it channeled women's ready labor, free labor into those activities that were actually quite on par with the patriarchal norms. And in so doing, it effectively limited the scope of their activism. And then going fastly to the Mohammad Reza Shah period. So Mohammad Reza Shah was the son of Reza Shah, who took throne after Reza Shah was expelled from Iran, exiled rather from Iran after the Second World War. And Mohammad Reza Shah pretty much continued this pattern of co-optation of the Iranian women's movement. However, there's a quote here by Elis Sanasarian, who's an Iranian female historian, who has argued, I think this is an apt quote to sort of capture the difference between the two Pahlavi Shahs. Quote, while Reza Shah had coerced activist women into the government, his son encouraged organizational co-optation, whereby all women would come under a central institution for women. Coercion involved the use of brute force in the face of opposition. Co-optation contained some force, but mainly a great deal of political arm twisting. So I've argued that actually his strategy was a divide and conquer strategy. Oof, 2 minutes. There was one, so I think I will try to go a little bit faster for the sake of time. This is an image of Iranian women's organization within the leftist political movements before the 1979 revolutions. Iranian women became guerrilla activists. They became partisans. They were active members of the Marxist opposition groups. There's a picture of an Iranian student, female student, holding two books. One is, you can recognize Lenin, perhaps, as the book Young Lenin, and the other one is the history of the Russian Revolution. On the right-hand side is the image of the revolutionary femme fatale, Ashraf Dehqani, who was one of the co-leaders of one of the biggest guerrilla activist groups, the Fadayan Khalq, who most of us have never even seen a picture of. This is the 1960s in Iran. And then this is an image of, on the left-hand side is again the Women's March, the first Women's March after the revolution. On the right-hand side, we have an image, I think from 2009, whereby the woman is holding a picture of their feminist foremothers, if you may. So I like this image in that it captures the continuity of women's activism. So to sum it up, Iranian women have been all but passive victims. There was a New York Times article recently, I'm sure many of you saw it, who declared that Iranian women are the heroes of the world. We would like to claim that we are, but also in the article it claims that Iranian women woke up with the death of Jina, or it calls it a death, it's a murder of Jina, from a hibernation. And what we're trying to establish here is that Iranian women never hibernated. We were active, we were paying a political price, but the world just wasn't listening. And that now we're at a political juncture, where the world can no longer afford to not listen to our activism. I want to argue that women's bodies in Iran have emerged as contested ideological and political battlegrounds over and over again. This was clear in the case of the ban on hijab under Reza Shah. About a century later, the ban of not being covered under the Islamic Republic, so the imposition of the hijab under the Islamic Republic, and I think it was also crystallized in the attack on the bodies of women sex workers in the Shahrino area, or in the New City area that I talked about, and the commencement of political execution on their gendered bodies. I want to also argue that the female cause has been instrumentalized time and time again by political actors from across the spectrum until it served their nationalist, masculinist political purposes, and as soon as it did not, their causes were sidelined. And that's a fear that we have for this revolution as well, that Jina's murder put us on the spotlight, commenced the revolution, but as soon as the new regime comes into power, that Jina becomes the first person to get erased. And that's something that I think as Iranian women, feminists, queer people, we need to fight so that this chapter of history doesn't repeat itself. And I think I'm going to leave it there and then invite us to have a discussion, an open discussion. This is an illustration by, again, an unknown Iranian artist. The image on the left is Jina wearing her Kurdish red dress. And on the right-hand side, our motto, Woman, Life, Freedom, and Jian, Azadi. This poster was designed by our dear and treasured friend, Saide Jabani. So thank you all so much. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Donya, for this very inspired and inspiring lecture. I think very effectively also contextualizing the fact that women have actually been so very active politically and in a very dangerous context as well. Like there's actually something very much on the line for women at all times in Iran, especially to take to the streets or to be involved in any protest movement. So thank you for contextualizing this. It is now time for people in the audience to ask questions, and for this we have a marvel of technology, I think, the catch box. We will go around with, it's mic'd, right? Yeah. I haven't used it before.
We can play a game, so you can
throw it in there, yeah.
Whoever catches can ask a question.
So I'm sure there's questions in the crowd. Anyone want to raise their hand already, or? Yes, the person in the back. There it goes. Wow. Successfully caught.
Yes. We talked a lot about the history of the events going on and, well, women's oppression in Iran, but I was curious, since we didn't really talk about what's happening now, why is it different now, what's happening now, rather than what happened in the past?
Under the Islamic Republic of Iran, you mean?
Yeah, well, since there are protests again now, and I heard a lot about news outlets talking about now this is different than what happened in the past. In your opinion, what is different now rather than what happened in the past?
Yes, very good question. It is different because the gender issue is at the forefront. Because the woman who is a symbol on whose body this revolution commences a woman. It's not just a woman, it's a Kurdish woman. So it's from an ethnic nation as well. And women have been with their bodies and souls at the forefront of this organization, but so have been feminist demands. That's why we argue it's a feminist revolution. And I mean, this is the sort of motto, if you may, main motto of this revolution, woman, life, freedom. And what happened in the past was that women's issues were not allowed to be prioritized because we were always silenced on the premise that there is a more pressing or more immediate issue at hand. a more important political issue. I'm sure many of you have heard this argumentation before. So after the revolution, when the women were taken to the street for the 8th of March protest, it was, you know, we have a new people's revolution, we need to preserve the revolution against imperialism. During the coup d'etat of the 1950s, the discourse was, we need to fight colonialism, or we need to nationalize resources, and that's a more prominent enemy, that's a bigger priority than women's issues. And again, this is a discourse that is reproduced today as well. That once we fix the economy, once the Ayatollahs are gone, women's issues are going to be solved inadvertently. But what we're arguing is that no, this is not a progressionist tendency, that we just go forward, we change regime. These gendered inequality, practices, systems of inequality are going to reproduce themselves unless we talk about it. And I think for the first time, we're seeing solidarity across ethnic nations. So we're seeing transnational solidarity within Iran, in a sense that we have people from Kurdistan of Iran have been at the forefront since the very beginning. And I think they have been constantly in the streets, but so have been the people in Baluchistan of Iran. So have been the Arab nations of Iran from the south of Iran. In the north, we've had the Gilak and the Mazandarani nations, the Azerbaijanis. And there is these solidarities that are extremely threatening to the Islamic Republic of Iran. We're also trying to talk for the first time as Iranian queer people about the non-erasure of queer people. Because we're saying now that this is not a time anymore that our demands will be sidelined for another priority. Does that make any sense? So I think what sets it apart is the gendered nature and extent of our demands in this revolution.
Over there on the other side, can we pass it on, like throw it into the crowd and one person catches and then it goes on there? Let's try this. We need to pay attention though.
You need to throw it.
All right.
Yeah. It's called the catch box.
It's not called the catch box for nothing.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, so the protest, the revolution has been going on for about 2 months now. In that time, as far as I understand it, there's been no centralized figure, there's been no centralized organization within these protests. In your opinion, do you think that the revolution can maintain its momentum going forward without this kind of centralization? And will it, as a result of that, lead to lasting change?
I think that's an important question. If I had the answer to this question, I'd be the leader of the self-appointed leader of this revolution. I think part of the reason why we're not seeing leadership in the traditional sense, now a lot of people argue that this is the 21st century version of political movements. My argument that no, this was engineered to be so. Because the foundations of political activism, of organization building, of collective political dissent were destroyed by this regime. So what we need, of course, we need leadership, but we need non-centralized leadership. We need a diversity of leadership. We need the feminist voice. We need the queer voice. We need the Iranian ethnic nations to be in the forefront. As to whether it would lead to long-lasting change, I mean, this is something that I always say myself, that we, with our feminist and queer sisters, we always talk about the fact that once the regime changes and the Ayatollahs are gone, that's where our work starts. So that's not our end goal. We just need to begin in a less vicious semblance of democracy will be enough, and then we will build from within. But yes, whether it will, leadership will emerge, and whether that will be a progressive leadership that will advance the causes of women, the causes of ethnic nations, that remains to be seen.
If I may add to this a little bit, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
Like these are questions and also talking points that are that I've seen as well in Arab protest movements, where currently actually people have been so demotivated to do anything because of this question, because of the question of there's no central leadership, there's no central ideology, there's no way to lead us forward, so we might as well not do it anymore. Yeah, these questions, I mean, it's a great question to ask, of course, but it's for the activists themselves, it quite often holds them back to think this way. One of the things that I'm personally very curious about is how do these movements develop out of the way that we've actually described them in the past, because that's where I probably believe the opportunities lie, right? We think of revolutions as led by some central leader figure and ideology, whereas if things just happen and how do I say this, keep momentum going, that'll put real pressure in every different way, actually. So I'm not sure how this works in Iran, obviously, but this is something that I've seen, and I've actually seen also for the past few weeks demotivating people in Egypt to go to the streets during the climate summit a few weeks ago.
I think it's important, Hisham, that you say this, because we need to think of revolutions also as constructive processes rather than destructive processes through which leadership forms.
Right.
Because I think in the past 2 months we've been able to create community in a way just within Groningen amongst ourselves that I think we would not have been able to if it wasn't for this revolution. So, and I know that we are talking amongst, the thing is that it is difficult under the level of suppression in Iran right now, because anyone with leadership tendencies gets picked up and then goes into heinous torture regimes, usually is compelled to give forced confessions, and right now they're facing execution, so some of them are executed. And I think that is part of the difficulty that the Islamic Republic of Iran recognizes charismatic people who have the potential to organize people and then targets those people specifically. But at the same time, I think people in the diaspora are trying, we are talking with some feminist activists in the diaspora to create a feminist party, to write a constitution with gender demand, intersectional gender demands on the forefront. So we need to do some work. But there is also the tangible material difficulties of creating leadership and creating collective actions within the country, because the degree of violence and repression is unprecedented, if I may say.
Any other questions for the catch box? Oh, there you go.
Who are the main allies of the Islamic Republic?
Who are the main
allies of the Islamic Republic?
Oh my God. Inside, outside, who are the main allies of the Islamic Republic? I think the inside. Do you mean in the international political environment?
Yeah, international.
I think it's an interesting question to raise right now, because we see that these allyships are not solidified, right? There are, up until a few months ago, seemingly China and Russia were big allies of the Islamic Republic. Now, a few days ago, we saw that China has given a joint statement with the Saudi regime condemning violations of human rights in Iran. So I think allies perhaps is too generous a term. I'd rather frame it as such. The Islamic Republic of Iran has had very invasive lobbying tactics to which it has funneled a lot of funding so as to create a dialogue that legitimizes this regime, that presents it as a sort of anti-imperialist independent regime. A discourse to which a lot of people have subscribed over the past decades, as much as we don't like to admit. There has been pervasive infiltration in the academic environment. I can say that as a gender studies scholar myself who works on Iran, that the publication scene in academia is dominated by this discourse that argues that the Iranian people are disenfranchised because of sanctions alone, and not because of internal mechanisms of suppression that are historically and materially rooted. So I don't have a clear-cut answer. I think the allies shift and change because, of course, internationally, different states are also trying to understand whether this is a regime with which they will have a prolonged sort of interest in terms of their connection.
Okay, thank you.
I'm curious whether there is something to do now in Groningen to support or like build some kind of solidarity there, like what practically, whether there is something we can actually do. I wonder what you think about it.
Yes, it's difficult. I mean, what is beyond the spread the word, the solidarity? I think we need to join forces in action. So when I talk about the sitting, I will really extend this invitation to our siblings across the world to come and physically join us, especially to bring their privileges, their passport privileges, their racial privileges, their gender privileges, to come and organize with us. I think at this point we want, not as an end game, but as the beginning, we want the cutting of diplomacy with this country. We want their members of government to leave the Netherlands. We want the diplomats to be called back. And I think from there on, Masoud is also here with his petition. I'm going to invite him in a few minutes to come and talk about his strategies. I don't know. My Iranian friends, I extend an invitation to you to share if you have any suggestions, if you have any, what can we do? That's the question that we keep asking ourselves. We're also at a point where we feel like organizing, taking to the streets, it's not taking us where we are. It's given us a sense of community, but at this point we're like, we need to put more pressure. But I think at the very least, we need diplomatic cut of ties. We need the world to acknowledge that this is a revolution, that this is not a domesticized issue.
Okay, but do you think that that would help, like this cutoff you mentioned?
I think it would be a beginning of taking a firm stance.
Yeah, because, I mean, unfortunately, I'm not that political person, but like I remember like what happened in Afghanistan. Like for a few weeks, we were kind of busy with this news, but then somehow we get isolated completely because we don't see these things on news and so on. So I'm just, I was just curious how to be effective in some sense.
I think the people who will be most effective are the people who are organizing in the country. At the end of the day, those are the people who are paying the price with their minds and bodies and souls, right? So I think there is a lot of discussions about sanctions. Now, I'm very suspicious of sanctions, of not to follow suit with our National Iranian American Council colleagues. But sanctions have not been effective. They've been effective in disenfranchising people who are working class, who are living on the margins even more. And they certainly haven't made the Ayatollahs any less rich or any less powerful. I think there is a lot of under-the-table exchanges of weaponry. This is something that we're seeing time and again evidence of European, so much of the bullets that have been used, so much of the weapons of warfare that have been used to suppress Iranian protesters are directly purchased from European nation states. There is exchange of political prisoners, right? So there are these exchanges that these governments here are not stopping because there's money to be made or there's geopolitical leeway to be gained. And I think that's why I think this is an issue for all of us to organize around. This is not just Iranian women's issue or Iranian queer people's issue or Kurdish and Baluchi people's issue. This is really a political issue for all of us if we claim to be concerned about politics. Beyond that,
No, thanks.
If I may, also the argument gets thrown around a lot that adding to sanctions or even cutting ties would further isolate Iran and cause more problems for Iranians, more so than the regime. Today also the news, or in the news there was this report that the UN Women's Council is planning to kick out Iran. How would you respond to these kinds of arguments that it wouldn't be beneficial to anyone to isolate them further and maybe also put the Iranian government out of the world's eye to...
But that's the thing, the Iranian government has been outside of the world. What are they going to do? Are they going to execute innocent people? They're doing it in public. Are they going to murder people in broad daylight? Are they going to rape continuously women and queer people and parade around. What else is there to do? I think part of this discourse is also being lobbied by the Islamic Republic of Iran. They don't touch us. Of course, we don't want intervention. Of course, we're seeing in Afghan sisters, we're seeing what's happening in Iraq and Syria. But that discourse of don't do anything, there will be internal war, or don't do anything, there will be Daesh, or the Islamic Republic is our Daesh. They've institutionalized fundamentalism. They've taught Taliban how to have international discourse. And that's why we also think of
Daesh
the Iranian...
as in Islamic State
Yes.
of Syria and Iraq. Yeah.
Yes. So I think, and that's why we do strongly believe that the feminist revolution in Iran is inspiring to sister revolutions in other Middle Eastern and Arab countries, in Afghanistan, that the Islamic Republic of Iran is a terrorist state that is sort of how do you say, it's sort of agitating in different contexts, and is even directly involved in the repression, the political repression in places like Syria, in places like Iraq. So at this point, we're like, what else is there to do? They've already started the executions. But what we fear, the worst that we feared, has already started happening. If the world doesn't act now, what else, you know?
I think this would be a good time to one more question, and then we move to Masoud coming up front.
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
So there were reports that the morality police would be abolished, right? I'm not sure if that really happened, but do you interpret that as a sign of weakness from the regime, or how would you interpret it? Or as useless?
This is a clickbait piece of news that was taken out of context, and somebody said something about morality police being abolished. Somehow, before the news even reached us, it was made a headline in the New York Times, and it was published in Guardian. So no, this is non-news. It was never news. And also, even if it was, I was having this conversation with one of our colleagues today, that even if this was actually happening, what would this actually entail? The morality police is entangled in every encounter. In every institution you walk into, there's a morality police at play. So even if this one particular body went away, it actually did not make any material difference. And even that didn't happen. Even that was too radical for the Ayatollahs. But then that's when we're talking about lobbying power on behalf of the Islamic Republic outside of the country, we're talking precisely about this. How was something taken out of context and became international headline before even some of us in Iran heard about it? That is, I think, an interesting question for us to ask. But no, it wasn't abolished. I think it's fully enforced both ideologically and actually materially. I would like to ask Masoud to come to the front. I would like to invite you, بفرمایید, to tell us a few things. So Masoud would like to share a few words with us, an invitation to action, I think so. And then I'm going to do my best to translate. شما بفرمایید جمله و من ترجمه کنم آقا مسعود.
تشکر از شما. به نام انسانیت. ما امروز شاهد هستیم که رژیم جنایتکار اسلامی خیلی وقیحانه دست به کشتار مردم و اعدام معترضان میزند که از ظلم این رژیم آخوندی به خیابان آمدند.
I must say Masoud has written this very beautiful and poetic text, and I'm going to fail miserably at relaying how beautifully written this text is. But he starts with, in the name of humanity. Today we are witnessing a genocidal regime, Islamic regime, which cruelly has started to murder people and execute protesters who have come to the streets, taken to the streets out of the cruelty and injustice of this Ayatollah regime.
آنها با یک دادگاه کاملا نمایشی برای جوانانی که در اعتراضات شرکت کردند حکم اعدام می‌دهند.
They have held completely sham court cases in which the youth that have taken to the streets to protest have been sentenced to execution.
اعدام حسین شکاری و مجید رضا رهنورد در ملأ عام سند محکمی است که لااقل حاضران جلسه به آن مهر تایید می‌زنند.
The political executions of Hossein Shekari and Majid Reza Rahnavard in the public domain are firm evidence that at least the people in the space can affirm.
مگر می شود از اعدام و ناعدالتی گفت و از بلوچستان نگفت؟
How can we talk about murder, injustice and execution and not talk about Baluchistan?
از ابتدای سال 2022 تا 30 نوامبر دست کم 370 بلوچ کشته شدند.
Since the beginning of the year 2022 until 30 November 2022, at least 370 Baluch people have been murdered.
136 نفر رو اعدام کردند.
136 have been executed.
128 نفر رو در اعتراضات کشتند.
128 have been murdered while protesting.
106 نفر که سوختبر بودن کشتنشون.
106 people who were carrying fuel carriers were murdered.
آنها برای ایجاد رعب و وحشت در بین مردم دست به این اعدام‌ها در ملأ عام می‌زنند.
In order to create fear and desperation between people, they have commenced the political executions in public.
ولی جامعه جهانی چشم خود را بر روی این اعدام‌ها بسته. چرایش را منم نمی‌دانم.
But the international society has chosen to close its eyes on these executions. Why? I do not know.
من امروز میخوام صدای مادر خدانور باشم که پسرش را مزدوران رژیم کشتند.
Today I want to be the voice of the mother of Khodanur, whose son was murdered by the murderers of this regime.
و دخترش از مرگ خدانور سکته کرد.
And her daughter died out of the sadness of this news of the murder of Khodanur.
میخواهم درد دل پدر ناصر، عمر و انوشروان باشم.
I want to be the voice of the father of Omar, Nasser and Anushiravan.
پدری که در یک روز 3 فرزند خود را در زندان زاهدان بر روی چوبه دار تحویل گرفت.
A father who in a single day received 3 of his sons hung on top of a pole in the prison in Zahedan.
میخوام صدای هستی باشم که در جمعه خونین زاهدان کشته شد. فقط 7 سال داشت.
I want to be the voice of Hasti who was murdered in the bloody Friday of Zahedan while she was only 7 years old.
تا 2 هفته هیچ کس اسمش رو هم نمیدونست.
We did not even know her name until 2 weeks after her murder.
2 ماه طول کشید تازه 2 عکس ازش اومد.
It took 2 months for us to even see a picture of her.
بعد از 2 ماه تازه ما فهمیدیم 7 سالشه.
After 2 months we only understood that she was 7.
در حال حاضر 2 عکس بیشتر در فضای مجازی نداره و کشته شد.
All we saw of her were 2 photos in the online environment and she's been murdered.
دوستان اگر این نقض حقوق بشر نیست، اگر این جنایت علیه بشر نیست، پس نامش را چه بنامیم؟
If this is not a violation of human rights, if this is not a crime against humanity, then what can we call this?
دوستان در سرزمین من بلوچستان هر روز جنایت علیه بشریت رخ می‌دهد.
In my land of Baluchistan, every day there is crime against humanity taking place.
من خودم شاهد بودم که هر روز جوانان ما به خاطر لقمه این نان مجبور بودند که برای مبلغی ناچیز سوخت جابجا کنند.
I have witnessed with my own eyes that our youth, for their daily food, have been compelled to carry fuel, physically carry fuel, to be able to make a little bit of money.
آنها در مسیری که مسیر مرگ و زندگی بود توسط مزدوران رژیم مورد اصابت گلوله جنگی قرار می گرفتند.
The agents of the regime would shoot at them with war bullets while they were carrying the fuel on these roads, on these deadly roads.
یا زنده در آتش می سوختند، حتی جنازه ای از آنها نمی ماند که به خانواده هاشون تحویل بدیم.
Or due to the shooting, they would burn alive while carrying fuel, and there would not even remain a body of them that could be given to their family to bury.
در بلوچستان شغل و تحصیل آرزوست.
In Baluchistan, working and studying is a dream.
در بلوچستان آب یک آرزوست.
In Baluchistan, water is a dream.
خیلی ساده بگم در بلوچستان آرزو هم یک آرزوست.
In Baluchistan, having a dream is itself a dream.
دنیا شاهد بود که در روز 30 سپتامبر 2022 در زاهدان بیش از 100 نفر از مردمی که برای اقامه نماز آمده بودند از بالا با هلیکوپتر و از پایین با تک‌تیرانداز مورد اصابت گلوله قرار گرفتند.
The world saw that on 30 September 2022, more than 100 people who had gone to a mosque to say prayer were shot at from above with helicopters and from below with bullets and were murdered.
اگر این جنایت علیه بشریت نامیده نمی شود پس آن را چه بنامیم؟
Again, if this is not a crime against humanity, what can we call this?
امروز سکوت در مقابل این جنایت خیانت به بشریت است.
Today, staying silent in the face of such violations of human rights is a treason to humanity itself.
امروز تمام دنیا در کنار مردم ایران باید بایستد.
Today, the entire world must stand next to the Iranian people.
تا بتوانیم این ماشین کشتار رو متوقف کنیم.
So we can stop this killing machine.
چون که این رژیم شروع به آغاز اعدام‌هایی از نوع دهه 80 میلادی کرده است.
Because the regime has now begun the executions of the 1980s.
سوال اینجاست چگونه این ماشین کشتار رو متوقف کنیم؟
The question is how can we stop this murder machine?
در همین راستا من از 7 اکتبر تا 14 اکتبر به مدت 8 روز جلوی سفارت ایران تحصن کردم.
In order to get an answer to this question, I sat for 8 days from 7 October until 14 October in front of the consulate of Iran in The Hague, but I did not get an answer from politicians.
ولی ناامید نشدم.
I did not lose hope.
تحصن دیگری را مقابل وزارت امور خارجه هلند شروع کردم.
I have started yet another sitting, this time in front of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands.
از 17 نوامبر تا 6 دسامبر به مدت 20 روز ادامه دادم.
This time from 17 November until 6 December for the duration of 2 weeks I sat.
در حال حاضر یک پوتیشن در شهرهای مختلف هلند می روم تا امضا جمع بکنم.
Right now I'm taking this very petition around to different cities in the Netherlands to get signatures, to collect signatures.
تا یک سؤال را به پارلمان هلند ببرم.
In order to take one question to the Dutch Parliament.
و از دولت هلند و تمام دولت‌های اروپایی بپرسم
So I can ask the Dutch government and all European governments.
آیا انقلاب ملت ایران را به رسمیت می‌شناسید یا خیر؟
do you recognize the revolution of Iran, officially or not?
تا از این طریق همه دست به دست هم بدهیم و این ماشین و کشتار را متوقف کنیم.
So we can begin to together stop this murder machine. Thank you so much, Master.
تشکر.
Can I be the first person to sign? We need so I'm going to start signing this, and please, by all means, feel free to come to the forefront. Read the text is in Dutch, and we can sign any هر جا بخوایم امضا کنیم.
آره.
So if you would like to sign the petition, you're more than welcome to come read it and sign it. And again, thank you all so much for coming.
Everybody, please, before you leave, thank you again, Donya, for an inspiring lecture, and thank you as well, Masoud, for your powerful words. One note for everybody is that there is actually the opportunity to go for drinks and to discuss more at Café Woldhoorn, right? So if you would like and you still have time, please join us at this cafe. And I believe Studium Generale would also like to extend a appreciation to Donya.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much to Hesham for facilitating.
You're very welcome.
That's so kind. Oh, that's quite nice. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much.
That's very nice. Thank you very much. All right, everybody, thank you very much for coming to this very inspiring evening. And this concludes the evening for now. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.